Welcome to our podcast. Today I'm joined by Jenny Brown, and together we will explore coaching pre and post career promotion. Jenny has a 20-year background in auditing for not-profit and public sector organisations. Jenny seamlessly transitioned her career into a multifaceted role, leveraging her expertise as a qualified coach, NLP practitioner with a degree in psychology. Jenny now wears many hats as a coach, a coaching supervisor, a chair of a housing association, a governance consultant, and much sought after trainer and facilitator. At the core of her eclectic career is a steadfast commitment to fostering authenticity and inclusivity, helping individuals harness their unique strengths to thrive personally and professionally. So welcome, Jenny. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here as our guest today.
Thank you very much for having me here. I'm looking forward to a great conversation.
And me too. And I hope we can explore all the great experience that you've had, and you obviously bring, I'm sure, to your coaching practice.
Yeah.
So the first question I'd like to ask, just to help you and I to really be clear about what we're talking about, the topic, and our listeners to understand that, outline what you mean by pre and post career promotion coaching.
So more and more organisations, or indeed individuals, are identifying the value that people can get from having some coaching as they're getting ready to be promoted. So maybe that's that they're on a internal development program at an organisation as part of a sort of a formal promotion process. Maybe it's somebody who's been identified as a rising star, needing some additional support to get through to the next level. And also seeing that coaching being put in place post a promotion happening, sometimes in a proactive space. So sometimes it's a proactive thing that says, we've promoted you, let's create some coaching support for you. Sometimes it's reactive. So you've got somebody who's been promoted and maybe found they need a little bit of extra support to find their feet in the new role. But for me, this is one of those areas where organisations are identifying that there's a huge amount of value in creating some coaching support.
Yeah. And I guess what you're saying, planned and formal, or reactive if suddenly they get promoted and they need to find that support for that individual.
Yeah.
And I guess in my language, what I'm also understanding this to be is top talent coaching for those that you want to promote. So that's a very much a plan, identify that talent and plan that through. And another term that I guess our coaches or HR professionals are listening is transition coaching. Yeah.
Yes,
okay, brilliant.
Absolutely. And in some cases, actually they're being there to solve a problem as well. So I do see it sometimes where somebody's been promoted, particularly I think where maybe they've stepped into a senior colleague's role when the other person's left. So maybe they haven't had that kind of deliberate step into a promotion. It's been reactive in the organisation, and then realising that actually that person needs a little bit of help as well. So I think there's a third one as well, relates to transition, but it's usually when there's some sort of tension arising and a need to help somebody get their feet back on the level ground.
Yeah, and I guess if someone within the organisation suddenly decides to resign and leave, you've got to fill that space.
Exactly.
So someone's got to step in at quite short notice and they haven't been prepared.
Exactly.
And the coaching can prepare them and help them manage that transition into the role that they didn't think they'd get or weren't expecting to get at that time.
Yeah, exactly. Particularly when the organisation maybe doesn't have a lot of other development programs. So you can almost go overnight from, being reporting into a person to actually doing that person's role. And the organisation doesn't always understand quite how big a shift that can really be for someone.
Yeah. And I guess my next trail of thought is, what is it that you provide in that support, not only for that sort of suddenly I'm in that position, but also when it's planned? And I guess not only what do you support, is that support different for both of those sort of either planned or not planned scenarios?
So it really depends on the organization that I'm working with and the individual. Sometimes it's an incredibly structured process.
Yeah.
So working alongside a development program, for example, where there are 3 coaching sessions that go alongside some workshops and those sorts of things. And that experience is always interesting because you really hit people at different levels. So some people are sort of there for the coaching because it's ticking a box on the program. I do some coaching, I get through this program, then I'll be in line for promotion.
Yeah.
Whereas for other people, it's a real moment to have some space, facilitated space for themselves to reflect on who they are and how they can move things forward. There is a third sort of situation as well, where sometimes people, when in misunderstanding what coaching is in that situation, they see it much more like, tell me what I need to do to pass this process.
Right.
And
Okay.
it can be
Yeah.
very process oriented. And I've had a lot of success over the years from someone coming into the room with that. I'm here about the process, and over a number of sessions, getting them to see actually this is about personal development. And those are some of the really satisfying ones where you get someone move from that, I just need to pass this process, to see that actually there's so much that they can get out of really reflecting on who they are and what they're going to be as a leader.
Yeah, great. And that's really interesting. I hadn't thought of that. And just on reflection, I do see that in some of the programs we run where individuals will come forward and they sort of think, right, okay, I just need to get through this. I've been promoted, just need to get through this. I'll just attend. Yeah,
Yeah,
as you say, tick boxing exercise. And then you all get the other individuals that realize they do need to go through it, but they want to go through it because they see it as part of their growth and development, and promotion is always or is part of that.
yeah,
And then I guess the third element, which makes a little link with the first part, is that, I'll just tell me what I need to do to get through this.
yeah,
So quite transactionary. And I
yeah,
guess not embracing the responsibility that a good coachee, and I guess if we're critical here, good leaders should do is embrace that responsibility and ownership and authenticity of, I'm not just doing this because I've got to. I'm doing this because this will make me a better person, therefore a better leader, so I can fulfill that new role more effectively.
yeah. And I think what's interesting there is also the role that the organization who's setting it up plays as well. You and I know, and all the listeners will know, the value of coaching and how coaching can be truly transformational.
Mm,
And it can be restorative, it can be all of these different things. And yet there is still, even those people who are signing up to thinking about coaching, those organizations talking about coaching, there still can be an expectation that it is a transactional process.
mm,
You know,
mm.
we as coaches will somehow bring somebody into the room, iron out all of the problems, make them into the perfect candidate that is exactly what the organization needs, as opposed to really embracing it from even from a diversity and inclusion perspective that says, actually, let's make this person the very best them they can be,
Yeah.
and that will serve you well as an organization. So I do still see that some of these programs, there's suggested frameworks into, you'll talk about this topic, you'll talk about that topic. And the coaching is really, in those instances, I think, really being perceived as additional learning and training time
Yeah.
with a
Yeah.
coaching style. Where the value is really about making your people able to think for themselves, able to be reflective leaders, building on their own agility, all of those things that we know the leaders of the future need.
Yeah.
And many do get it, but sometimes you do still see that even the organization sees it as process.
Yeah. And I see that sadly a lot of the time. And I think there's a lack of education for the coachee about what coaching is and what it
Yeah,
can provide to them as individuals.
yeah,
So let's do a little sort of role play, if we may. I'm your coachee, and I
yeah,
come on one of the. What can I expect to experience in that sort of first session to get me engaged and really excited and understand that the value that spending time with you, my precious time, I'm a busy
yeah,
individual,
yeah.
spending time with you and helping me to prepare, be ready, and be successful in this new role. Give me a sort of understanding of that, Jenny, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, well, I would always start off, as any coach would be, thinking about the rapport. So
Yeah.
understanding where the person is right now. So what are their thoughts about coaching?
Mm.
What's your previous experience? I'd ask you to tell me about your previous experience of coaching. What are you expecting from our sessions together? And then I'd also usually start with a question: what would a really good outcome at the end of our time together look like? So if we
Mm.
fast
Mm.
forward to the end of these 5 sessions that we're going to have,
Yeah.
who is the Trayton that we're going to see at the end of those 5 sessions?
Yeah. Yeah. And what I like about that is that you're putting responsibility onto me to tell you not only what I want to see, but I guess start to take ownership of that journey myself as we progress through that to help me achieve what I said I want to achieve. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that's important in this as well, and this is very much part of my own coaching philosophy. I know we all have different ways of doing things, is I believe I need to have that agility to, in each session, hold that space so that it best serves the person I'm talking to. So it best serves the coachee. So if I become overly fixated on what we talk about in that first session, right, so you tell me that by the end of those 5 sessions, you want to have really confident meetings with the senior colleagues that you're now part of the team, of all of these sorts of things. We hold that, and that's there. But it might be that when we meet for the second time, actually, you've just had a particular scenario turn up with one of your direct reports, and the
Mm. Mm.
conversation turns into something that's in a very different direction, a very different part of the role. Keep checking into that overall objective, but allowing the flexibility over the period of time that you will, you can have that period of discovery as well.
Yeah.
So, I've never been one of those coaches that sort of says, right, we'll fill forms in and then we'll keep coming back to them. Are we achieving that? Are we achieving that?
Yeah.
As long as we are achieving and we're seeing change happen and checking in on that change, is this still right? We'll very often pick a topic for the next time we meet at the end
Yeah.
of one session, leaving people
Yeah.
with things to go away and test out and experiment safely.
Yeah.
But very often what I find is we come to the next session, we have a quick update on that and then say, but actually something else has come into my mind and this is what I want to deal with. Because that's what life's like, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
we can write these grand plans, but life happens. And
Those
sometimes
changes.
just having
Yeah.
that ability to sit and reflect is invaluable.
And I work in a similar way. I sort of understand where the individual wants to get. So I call it the sort of the North Star. That's our
Yeah,
destination. That's our
yeah,
purpose. But that's a journey, and then on a journey, things can change, and we need to adjust. Our approach, the focus. But at the end of the sort of 5 sessions, 6 sessions, whatever it is, we know that that's where we are trying to get to, and hopefully we get to that and reviewing
yeah,
it on the way. So
yeah.
one of the things I'm curious is when you have these sort of conversations, say to people, where do I want to get to? And on that journey, there will be things that crop up. And you mentioned a couple of those meetings with various senior
Mhm.
members. What are some of the other themes and things that tend to show up when you're doing the sort of career coaching?
There's very often a theme around confidence in some way. And I think that's probably because of my style, the way that I describe my coaching technique. I think I probably am more likely to end up with coachees who are looking to build their confidence in some way. But the thing that never ceases to amaze me is how different that can look for different people. Um, I do hear a lot of people talk about imposter syndrome,
Sure.
and kind of raise that as a thing. And I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with imposter syndrome because I have a real issue with the word syndrome,
Mm.
because whilst I've seen people, once they've heard about imposter syndrome, it gives them a real sense of this is not just me. Other people feel like this as well. And I think that is amazing,
Mm.
that
Mm.
ability to look further afield, see that it isn't just you that's dealing with those sorts of thoughts. It isn't just you that sits there sometimes thinking, I'm 15 years old in my head. Why are these people asking me what they should be doing, with their work? But there's a downside, which is that we can label ourselves with it. And I think sometimes we can add it into our narrative. So, oh, I have imposter syndrome, and it becomes sort of almost self-fulfilling prophecy.
Sure.
What I also think as well is that actually people experience whatever that feeling is, that feeling of should I be here, in very, very different ways. So for some people, it will play out as having to feel like they always have to work super, super hard because the second they stop, it'll all fall apart. There are other people who are, genuinely just doubting their ability to do things. Whereas there are other people who are really confident about their ability. They're just not sure of other people's perception of them, or that they're not worthy. So there's all these different elements that play out. And one of the concerns I have with imposter syndrome is someone says I have imposter syndrome. First of all, they're creating a narrative out of that. But secondly, if we just coach at that level, we're making assumptions about what it is that they're actually experiencing. There is a big difference between that sense of self and authenticity and a sense of confidence in
Sure.
other people valuing that authenticity. They're
Yeah.
huge differences. So that's one of the things that I often explore with people is, well, when you say you're not very confident, what do you mean by that? How does it show up?
Yeah.
What is it that we're actually trying to work with here? And so that's one theme. Another theme, and I have to say it's probably one I introduce to people in terms of actually actively getting them to explore it, is the extent to which they rely on external validation. Because I think the more senior people get, the less external validation, the less positive external validation they'll get. And one of the things that I've seen, particularly in post promotion coaching, especially when somebody suddenly becomes a peer to the person who has been till now their champion, there's a really difficult tension there, because suddenly they haven't got somebody telling them that they're really amazing and they've got all this potential and they can move forward, and they know where they're going, and they've been so focused on this sort of, particularly when it's a sort of a very senior promotion, and suddenly their champion is their peer. And it's not to say that their champion isn't still supporting them, but that support will look very, very different. Yeah. And, maybe now most of the feedback that they get is actually from direct reports in the broader business about what they're not getting right. So that positive feedback comes in. And I think there are a lot of people out there. There's a whole sort of cohort, a whole personality style, even bigger than that, of people who are exceptionally dependent on the external validation to motivate them.
That's really interesting. I want to just go back to theme one before I sort of come back to theme two for a minute. And what I picked up from what you were saying is that using coaching language, there's a sort of an inner game that shows up that you need to work with, but there's also an outer game that you need to help them develop as well. And, with Tim Gale, we're in a game of tennis with self one, self two. You're working with both selves when you're working with that client. And exactly. So that's theme one piece. Theme two is interesting, and I'm curious that you bring it into the conversation, that validation. And I can see you shaking there as supervisor was saying, you bring stuff in, you bring. so help me understand, I guess, the rationale in bringing stuff in, because I think what how you explain it, I think it's very valid. And certainly, suddenly was getting all this praise, and now it feels like I'm getting criticism and being challenged, not just by my peers, but by others, and that's can have a negative impact, I guess. So, two questions there. One, why do you bring it in? And secondly, I'd love to just expand and understand how you might deal with that when that does show up.
Yeah. So I think it very often comes out itself in the post promotion coaching that I do. So it is very often, even where it's reactive. So, where the organization said this person's just flailing a little bit in their new role, not sure, they've gone from being, sometimes they've gone from being this amazingly sparky, confident individual, and just seeing that sort of light just fade with, and the organization, the senior colleagues who've kind of got them there can't understand it. Where's this amazing person that they've championed, and the light's gone? And very often when we've got into it, so when I say it's a theme that I've seen it come out time and time again. So in those instances, I don't often raise it. It's in exploring that situation. That's what's come out of it. And I suppose that's me using my learning from those things, that when I'm then working with people pre-promotion.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm sitting there and saying, okay, so let's think about, what's it going to mean to you, this being a more, in the more senior role? What's that going to feel like? So part of the preparation, I suppose, getting them into that space, And my own coaching philosophy and my sort of coaching supervision philosophy is very person centered. It's very around what they need, but with a strong sense that sometimes additional learning from outside can help them unlock those doors. So yes, the person has the resources that they need, but sometimes they might want to use those resources and expand them by learning other things. So it's sort of person centered with a heavy dose of learning being possible. And so that's why I raise it, because I have seen it be one of those things that people just haven't prepared themselves for. And I see it as my responsibility, if I'm part of a development program, my role is there to get somebody ready for promotion.
Yeah.
I see it as my responsibility to test out where some of those blind spots are. What have they really thought about?
Yeah. Nice.
We all bring our own filters, don't we, to coaching? So
Absolutely. And that's great. It's a great response. So, and the word blind spot for me is a key one. So because of your experience, that these things will likely show up, but people may not be aware that they're going to show up. So that's that blind spot. So you introduce it to, like we should do as coaches, to raise awareness, give them a different perspective on the situation, experiences that they might have. And that allows them, I guess, that aha moment to go, okay. And then it gives you permission to then talk into that and help them work out the approaches that they can take.
Exactly. And I don't sort of say to them, how dependent are you on external validation? What I tend to say to them is, I sort of say, okay, so at the moment, how do you know you're doing a good job? How do you know you're doing a good job? And very often what people say is, well, all these people are telling me I'm doing a good job. I've been put on this development program. And we kind of go through that process. Then I say, okay, so how will that change when you get promoted?
Yeah. No,
and it's that sort of, so it's very much part of that. It's moving into the transition type element that when you were sort of setting out those other elements earlier, it's very much putting into that, getting them ready, not just for that moment where, if there's an interview panel or what, it's not just about passing that or writing the right forms or convincing the right people. It's actually starting to think about, well, what if my dream comes true and I get it?
Yeah. And I guess, that's interesting, isn't it? Because for most, or a lot of people, I should imagine, getting that dream job is a dream, literally.
Yeah.
And the excitement around that, and focusing on all of the positives rather than focusing on some of the elements that they will come up against, which may be not so positive, there may be a negative impact to that, and helping them, I guess, to overcome those and manage those as they transition into that new role and that new experience.
Yeah. And I see it particularly in very structured businesses. So, there are a lot of organizations out there, aren't there, where somebody might join either from school or from university as a trainee. They get the trainee role, then they go to the next level. And there's this really clear career path for them. There's loads of organizational structure around that. There's clarity. And I very often see it when they sort of get to the top of that structure. It's what they've been working. It might be what they've been working towards in one way or another for the last 15 years. What next?
Yeah. And I guess there's a feeling of, you spent 15 years to get this dream job. You've got it now. And then some of your clients must go, it's not what I thought it was.
Absolutely. And I think, again, it's that thing, isn't it? As a coach, you always have to be really aware of the fact that you probably, because we work off affinity, and obviously as coaches, we really work on our biases and what we project to other people. But I think it does often play out in rapport and things like that, or even when people are reading your bio. So you sort of said about my bio earlier about spending 20 years as an auditor, and then doing something very different, and not at a retirement age or anything like that, but actually kind of going, do you know what? I got to where I was going and then thought, what is this? And so I think by my nature, I probably attract other people who've maybe gone through a similar experience. They see affinity in that sort of very structured career progression up to a certain point, and maybe are at the same point in their lives where they want some thinking around that. But I do hear a lot of conversations where, particularly people who've always been encouraged to work hard, they're the people who've been very focused, very diligent in their career. They've been maybe seen as career people, really focusing on the next thing, the qualifications, all these sorts of elements. They get to that point, as you say, where it's like, well, I've done all of that now.
Mm, mm,
And
mm,
sometimes what we can see is that although every time they've had a conversation at work, they're asked, what's your 5-year plan? What's your goal? It's all been very associated with salary and job description. And very often we can't even appreciate the extent to which we are influenced by the people around us as to what's possible. So maybe we've had the most amazing champions who've encouraged us in that career, and we've had all that great external validation, and this is great and I can do this, and then you see people getting to that point where it's like, well, I can do it, but is it what I want to do?
yeah.
Which skill sets am I using? But sometimes what we also see as well is that people have gone through that career progression, and what they realize is they get to the, not even necessarily the top of the tree, but a good way up the tree, and they realize that the elements of the job that they came into this role to do in the first place, they don't get to do that anymore. The classic example I use with lots of people is, the person who becomes principal of a school or head of a school very rarely does any teaching.
Sure.
And if what they went in there to do in the first place, yes, there's loads of people who love being a head of a school, but there are also lots of people who get there and kind of go, hang on, my reason for being, the thing that gave me the passion to be in this job in the first place, I only get to facilitate other people doing it. Is that enough? Is that what I want to be doing?
Yeah. Which is interesting because I know the title is pre and post promotion.
Mm-hmm.
Do you get to work with individuals that say, I don't want promotion? You know what? I'm really comfortable in this job and I just want to become even more comfortable and even more successful in the job that I'm doing. And I don't know what you would call that type of coaching, but it's not pre and post promotion. It's just, I don't know, just staying in that same role and being content and and just playing my best game with what I've got. Have you had experience of that?
I have. Unfortunately, I don't think a lot of organizations identify those individuals as being a good investment for coaching. I disagree with that decision, but I don't think those individuals tend to be the person who gets the coaching.
Yeah.
Where I do come across it is where people have been encouraged onto development programs that have some coaching associated with them. And I'm sort of having those conversations that we were just sort of outlining before. And you realize that the person's like, I'm sort of saying, what's the goal? Well, actually, I'm kind of here because my boss said I kind of needed to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we have a whole shift, and it's about making. Now, this is where, if both of us put our coaching supervision hats on, we get into that systems piece, don't we, around, well, what's the organization asked for versus what the individual needs. And,
challenges,
these are the sorts of great conversations I take to my coaching supervisor, and we talk about them. But I always come back to, fundamentally, there's the person in front of me, and without being completely subversive, it's about making sure that that person is the best employee for the organization.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like you say, that is very often about keeping them happy. And actually, for some people, that's around them being where they are, maybe in terms of job title, but expanding their horizons. We can be really binary, or organizations can be really binary. You're either in there for promotion, or you're, a middle laner, and those people can really quickly become poor performers because they don't get any of the love. But very often they are the linchpin to keeping the teams together. And I think those people often get really undervalued. So in those instances, I see it as my role to help them find their motivation. And that might be where I get them to, I use these two tools a lot anyway, but it might be where I get them to think about what their values are.
Yeah.
So, is being in that place in accordance with their values? Where are the tensions for them? Is there a bit of a pull for promotion? It's just that it's not the right time now. What's behind their statement? What do they really want to achieve? And I might also use Ikigai and get them to think about where they're getting that fulfillment from. Because sometimes for those people, actually, it's that they're happy with the job. It delivers what they need, but it's never going to fill off their Ikigai because, maybe they've got outside of work interests that are their real priority. And so as long as their job allows them to have that other priority, they're happy. So
Yeah.
really getting people to understand their own motivations and making sure that they understand that decision. So it's not a resistance, it's not a defensiveness, it's a really deliberate choice.
And I think just for our listeners, Ikigai is about having purpose at the heart of everything you do. And we'll
Absolutely.
put that in the show notes. We won't go into
Yes,
the
do.
details there,
No.
but just so our listeners are around that. And there's also, just listening to you there, it's fascinating because there is a great article by Harvard Business Review called "Don't Forget the B Players."
Yeah.
And a lot of these pre and post career focuses and the development is all about that top talent, those A players that are for promotion. And we've got to forget those people, those B players, if we can use that language, that are at the heart of making the organization sustainable and continue to work.
Absolutely. I think, and I think it's a very Western philosophy that, to be successful is to be forever moving forwards and upwards and to
Yeah.
be achieving. And that achieving is about big, crunchy goals, and it's about the big stuff. And whenever we look across it, actually, so much of what we rely on as human beings is some degree of stability.
Yeah.
As organizations, we rely on some degree of legacy. We've all seen those situations, haven't we, where, the person that everyone just assumed would be there forever
Yeah.
says, actually, I'm off.
Yeah.
And nobody saw it coming.
Yeah.
And
It disables the
it
organization
just
or individuals.
destabilizes
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
And I think, I think a lot of organizations would do really well. And even in the narrative, when we talk about those B players, to use the HBR language, it's very often about how to turn your B players into A players.
Sure. Yeah.
But the question is, what do you mean by an A player? Because we don't need all the chiefs. We
No.
actually need an organization that has some stability in it. But maybe it's about how do you have amazingly motivated B players?
Yeah.
It's pretty dismissive almost to kind of define them in that way, isn't it?
And I hope some of our listeners will reflect on that and think about how they do use the coaching and development, not just to support the A players, but also to support the B players and others, so that you do get the motivation and that stability and sustainability and making sure those people stay around and help the business to continue to function.
Yeah.
The other bit that's come to mind here, Jenny, as we've been talking, is on a similar sort of vein, that promotion tends to be in that sort of leadership hierarchy. And when you're leading not just the task and the sort of the function, but you're leading people.
Mm-hmm.
And some people aren't people, right? Some people are very technical. And you'll know that from your background in the auditing and the financial world.
Yeah.
So tell me about your experience where you've got a very technical individual that's being promoted. And how do you adjust, if at all, your approach of working with them where they're saying, I'm hesitant because I'm not a great leader. I'm great in this functional area, but I just don't know how to lead. But I'm asking to be stepping up and not only manage the function, but manage and lead people as well.
Yeah. So this is probably where I use some kind of content as well. So if I've got someone who's really technical, particularly if they love data and information, it's where I would actively share models of leadership with them.
Okay.
So I would almost put myself into that space of sharing it with them as a technical exercise. It might be where I get them to gather data. So if somebody is very technical, very data driven, I would be much more recommending things like psychometric profiles, 360 feedback. So being able to get data to work on that and then working out what skills they actually need for the new role. As an aside, I think one of the mistakes we make in lots of organizations is that we immediately assume that seniority in any particular role also by default has to have some sort of management or leadership of people responsibilities with it. So, you get promoted to manager in a lot of organizations. To be a manager, you have to be line managing people, for example. Now, that's not to say that you very often have to project manage people, but putting somebody suddenly in charge of somebody else's development and well-being at work when they're a self-professed non-people person, I think is really narrow-minded. So I think, hopefully as we continue to create more inclusive work environments will appreciate that, yes, it is about helping people develop their skills, but also sometimes acknowledging that letting people spend the time doing the things that they're really good at and structuring organizations around that can be really beneficial. We see it all the time with CEOs of large companies. They might be the big inspirational person, but absolutely dreadful at making practical business decisions. They find the ones who are successful find the person who can drive that, or the person who is the enforcer, the person who gets things done. And vice versa. If you've got a really introverted chief executive, they find somebody who's going to be an amazing comms person and marketing person. So we have all these different elements, but I think I would always start from that technical perspective. And not pushing it into a place of sort of behavior by numbers, but getting them to understand it and read theories because very often then I think they'll find in that content ways of being that are going to work for them.
And I think as coaches, we need to remember that coaching is all about learning.
Yeah.
And helping someone to learn. So understanding their learning preference and talking into that. So bringing that data and those models in. If they're more of a theorist in their learning style, then that's going to resonate with them. So
exactly.
try and force a different style that isn't going to resonate with them. And I always ask when I kick off with a coaching session, do you know how you learn best?
Yeah.
And that's fascinating that a lot of people don't. Even when they're, the sort of 40, 50 year bracket, they just don't know that. So that's an interesting point.
Yeah.
I want to also bring alive, if I'm someone's listening to this podcast, thinking, I'm obviously want to go for promotion, and I've got an opportunity to do that. What are some of the sort of pitfalls or mistakes that I might make that I can learn from you so that I minimize the impact of making those mistakes that you pick up that a lot of people make?
I think the first one, and potentially it's the biggest, is conflating what the business asks of you in order to tick the boxes to get the promotion.
Yeah.
Conflating that with the reasons why you want the job.
Okay.
So, particularly where interviews and things like that are involved, there might be certain ways of crafting answers that are going to be more likely for the panel to award you the new job.
Sure.
But I think very often people conflate how they articulate it externally with what they actually think about it internally.
So what I'm picking up then is your advice would be just be yourself.
Be yourself, but also think about what you really want from this promotion.
Okay. Yeah.
And it could be that it's like, well, I want some more money for it, or I feel I'm doing this job already.
Yeah.
And I'd like some more money for it. Thank you very much. And that's why I want the promotion.
Yeah.
But then stopping to think, right, okay, so what do I enjoy about my current role? What am I really good at in my current role? What do I enjoy? Where do I get the buzz?
Sure. Yeah.
And what do I hate about my current job? And then having a really honest look at what the expectations are, really sounding out, well, what's the promotion going to actually mean?
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes people assume that the promotion is going to take away some of the stuff that they don't like. They assume that the promotion might give them more opportunity to do the stuff they really like, and so on. And without really thinking about what it's going to mean, what is it for? What is it really for? So I think it's absolutely it's about being really authentic and doubling down on understanding who you are, what drives you, but then also really thinking about what that role is going to really mean in practical terms. Because I do get a sense that sometimes behind all the glory of the promotion and the pay rise and the status, there's also a bit of an away from driver. I'm fed up of work. I'm fed up with all of this stuff at this level. So I'm going to get promoted because, I don't see my boss doing all of this stuff, without appreciating that, the bit that your boss deals with it is the bit that you can't resolve.
Yeah. I really like that perspective, because I think I should imagine people get focused on all the hype, as you say, and the excitement about the positive things it's going to give them. But the reality of actually what does that role really mean? And more specifically, your question was, what does that actually mean to me?
Yeah.
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 And being, I guess, being honest with oneself, or even going and get other understanding from other parties within the business, other people that may be in a similar role, just
Yeah.
to get a real flavour and an understanding of that reality. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Absolutely. And I think sort of related to that is also understanding how you're going to respond to the new challenges. So the more senior you get in an organization, the harder it is to know what the heck's going on. So if you've spent your career being the person that is amazing at problem solving, at turning things around, and most of that you've done by your connections, by graft, by, throwing in the hours, all of those sorts of things, there comes a point where you can't do all of that. And in fact, you'll be a really bad leader if you try and do all of that, because you haven't got the time to do it. And also, it's really disempowering for the people that you're bringing in behind you.
Yeah.
But nor have you equipped yourself with the skills to monitor, to check in. It's beyond delegation. Delegation is something often a lot of us work on in our earlier careers, but it's kind of delegation plus. So that ability to matrix, lead or manage, that ability to understand what data is going to give you the information that you need. And I think that's where a lot of people in that role kind of hit that overwhelm point, because they don't feel like they're in control anymore. Their usual toolkit isn't working, because their usual toolkit is work harder or longer hours. That's not going to help. And also they don't get the validation from that, because very often if you're the problem solver, people go, well done, oh, you pulled us out of a hole there, that was brilliant. Whereas when you get to the senior point, people say, well, how did you let that hole open up in the first place?
Sure. You're suddenly held accountable on a different level.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's all these sorts of things that people don't sit and articulate, and senior colleagues might try to indicate it to us and say, have you thought about this? But they can't articulate the feeling of it.
Yeah. And I guess what I'm picking up from you, Jenny, is a key skill is being able to let go of the old role to enable you to move forward and have the space and capacity to embrace the new role.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I guess people would underestimate that, or would find it really hard to let go and adapt, because it is moving to a new role is change, right? It's a new way of having to operate. Maybe the same business, maybe the same function, whatever that is, but it's a new way of operating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jenny, it's been fascinating talking with you, and I'm sure that our listeners will take a huge amount from your experience. And what I loved about this conversation is very practical. I can feel you've been there, done it, and helped, I'm sure, so many people in the pre and post promotion with your coaching. At Coaching Focus, we have a simple purpose, which is coaching for a better tomorrow. And one question I ask all our guests before I let them go is, what does coaching for a better tomorrow mean to you?
For me, I think it's about helping the individual embrace their authenticity, so that we as individuals have higher levels of well-being, we kind of create better spaces around us, but then helping the broader organizations understand what their role is that is. So when kind of the individual's authenticity then driving change on an organizational scale, so that it kind of gains a momentum, the more we can move to a place that we stop being around trying to cookie cutter employees and tell them how to do things. It might be that, we will always need to say what needs doing, but allowing people the freedom to do that in the way that works for them, with a great impact on their colleagues.
Yeah. So having that authenticity, that empowerment at an individual level, but allowing that to flourish in a systemic way to impact the organisation and hopefully society beyond that.
Exactly.
So that we're coaching for a better tomorrow.
Yeah.
Jenny, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
It's been great. Thank you.
And I'm sure our listeners will have taken huge value from that. So thank you very much.